Hello, welcome. Alex here with stepbystepmusic.com. Today's lesson is on the natural minor scale pattern for bass and for guitar. On both of these instruments, the way we start to teach this pattern, the way we initially learn it, is exactly the same for bass and for guitar. So we're going to hit two birds with one lesson here and knock those both out together. We're going to have four main topics today on the minor scale. First, we're going to look at the importance of the minor scale, get you all souped up and jazzed up about learning it, get you excited a little bit. We're going to look at the natural minor scale pattern. So right away, I'm going to pull back the curtain, show you the pattern, show you how to play it. And after that, we're going to look at understanding the minor scale pattern as it relates to the major scale. We're going to look at how they're similar and how they're different. And finally, of course, I'm going to give you some homework and some advice on how you proceed to memorize this scale. We've learned the major scale, hopefully by now, in so many different ways that you're ready to move on. I call the major scale the gold standard because every scale is compared to the major scale. Every scale degree that we learn, every skill that we learn is based on the numbers of the major scale and how we make exceptions to those. Well, if the major scale is the gold standard, then we're going to think of the minor scale as the silver standard. In Western music, unless you're playing some really kind of just weird stuff, and all due respect to the weird stuff, but unless you're playing some really weird stuff, pretty much everything you've heard in Western music in the last 500 years is based on major or minor tonality. That means that it's sort of like, it is or sort of like the major scale, or it is or sort of like the minor scale. We think of music as generally being major or minor. Now, this can be in any given chord, any given moment, any given song. So on a small scale or a large scale, we're usually thinking major or minor. And so as you move forward, yes, all the scales that we learn are going to be compared to the major scale, but we're going to have the major set and the minor set. And so to make things easy, we learn the major scale really well, right? And we're also going to learn the minor scale really well. And so pretty much every skill that we learn from here on out is going to be exception of one of those two scales. So here is your natural minor scale pattern. I'm playing on a 4-string bass today. As long as you are playing on an instrument tuned in fourths, in other words, on the bass, E, A, D, G, or the low 4 strings of a guitar, this scale pattern will work. In other words, bass players, you're fine. Guitar players, don't cross the B string. When you learn this pattern really well, then you'll be ready to make exceptions and take those exceptions over the B string. Here we go. I'm going to play on an A today, so 5th fret, okay, low E string. Here's the pattern. Finger 1 on that 5th fret, okay? We're going to reach out, finger 3, then we're going to add finger 4, change strings, finger 1 again, finger 3, and finger 4. Okay, so just to review, so far, we have the same thing on both of our first 2 strings. We have 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4. Okay, not too bad. We're going to go to the next string, finger 1, and then to finger 3. Now, bass players, little aside here, you can go ahead and close that up. You can not overreach because we're not going to play any further. We're not going to be playing up in here today. So you can close that position up, play with finger 4. Guitar players, you can play 1 and 3 or 1 and 4. Either way, as long as there are these 2 notes. And if you're starting on the A, we're looking at the dots here, okay? Frets 5 and frets 7. So again, let's take it from the top, or as the scale goes, from the bottom. So fret 5 is finger 1, finger 3, finger 4. Next string, finger 1, finger 3, finger 4, and then frets 5 and 7. 5 and 7. Finger 1 and 4, or 1 and 3. That's the pattern. Simple as that. And remember, this shape works everywhere. If this is my A minor scale, then if I move from A up to B, B is my starting note. This is my B minor scale. If I move from B up to C, you guessed it, this is my C minor scale. Okay, let's do something really crazy. Let's do E flat minor scale. 6 flats. Oh, there's no way I could play a scale with 6 flats in it. Yes, you can. You start on the E flat, 6th fret of the A string, and you rip that scale. That's it. Wherever you start, that's the one for your minor scale. So you now know all of your minor scales. Congratulations. Now, if you've only been working on the major scale and you move to the minor scale, it can be a little bit confusing. And the one thing that I want you to remember is, what finger do you start with? If you remember your starting finger, a lot of times the rest of it will flow downhill. So major scales tend to start with the second finger. So here's my A, right? There's my 1, 2, 3 in A, starting with my second finger. Minor scales tend to start with the first finger. So I'm going to do my A minor scale, but I want to start with my first finger. So sometimes I see students trying their minor scale and they start with their second finger because they're used to it and they're trying to figure out where is that flat 3. So just make sure that you start off on the right foot, or in this case, start off on the right finger. Major scales start with 2. Minor scales start with 1. Now that you know the minor scale pattern, I want to help you understand this scale better. But first, I want to talk about how we understand all scales that are not the major scale. Any scale that we are learning that is not the major scale will always be compared to the major scale. Now, that's quite a burden for the major scale to carry all by itself, but it is our gold standard. It's our model for comparison. So let's look at the major scale first. Here I have the major and minor scales side by side. But first, let's just look at the major scale. As a reminder, these numbers are scale degrees. They are the numbers of the scale in order. So we have scale degree 1, scale degree 2, scale degree 3. We play these from 1 through 8. When we learn scales that are not the major scale, we make adjustments to the major scale. So remember that up is making a higher note. I could take this 4 and I could move it up the fretboard. That would give me a sharp 4. So any note that is moved up, any number that is moved to a higher note, we call sharp. Conversely, we could take this, I'll just say this 5, and we could move that down the fretboard. And again, to make a lower note, we would call that a flat 5. So here is my sharp symbol. Looks like a hashtag. Here is my flat symbol. Looks kind of like a squashed B. And those are the symbols that we use to denote changes to the major scale. Again, any scale that's not the major scale is by definition not the major scale, and therefore it is changed from the major scale. So we will take these individual numbers, the numbers that are not exactly like the major scale, we'll make them sharp, we'll make them flat, and that is how we think of every scale that is not major. To look at it in a different way, I have lined the scales up, or the notes of the scales up, in order. So if you saw them on a piano, they become much easier to see. They're linear. They're going from left to right. So that's how I've arranged them here. And we can see the whole steps and half steps between these various notes. So from the first to the second note of the major scale, we call that a whole step. And so again, we can see that a whole step on our fretboard is 2 frets. So there's that 2 frets there, and here is that 2 frets here. You can see the little mark showing the fret in between. And from the second note to the third note, well, that's also a whole step. That's also the distance of 2 frets. But on the bass or guitar fretboard, the way we patterned this scale, we can't really see that as well because we're changing strings here. So suffice it to say, from 2 to 3 is a whole step. So if I'm playing from here to here, that equates to a whole step in fret numbers. It just changes strings when we do it. So from 3 to 4, that's my half step. And we can go down, actually, let's go ahead and take a look at that. From 3 to 4, here we go. That's easy to see, half step. 4 to 5 is going to be a whole step. 5 to 6, whole step. 6 to 7, whole step. Again, we have this half step here between 7 and 8. We can check that out on my scale line here. 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 7, and then there's our half step between 7 and 8. So we can think of these scales as a series of whole steps and half steps, but like I said, it's a little bit easier to think of them in comparison to the major scale. So let's take a look at the minor scale and see how that's different. The minor scale, this 3 here, we had a third here, or the 3 in the scale. That was here, but that's gotten moved down. And what do you call it? When you move a note down, we call it flat. And so if I zoom in here, we can see this little flat symbol that I drew for you earlier. That's a flat 3. So the minor scale has a flat 3. Again, this is always compared to the major scale. I feel like I've said that before. Have I said that before? We also have a flat 6 and a flat 7. These three notes, these three exceptions or changes to the major scale, this is what defines the shape, if you will, of the minor scale. So as we learn other scales and modes, you will always learn them as exception to the major scale. Let's take a look at this on our fretboard as we compare the major and minor scales. We can see that scale degrees 1, 2, 4, and 5 are all in the same place when we compare them, when we overlay them. If this is my A major scale, this is my A minor scale. So I'm going to superimpose those on top of each other, so to speak, and imagine this is an A. Again, this could be any scales, A minor, A major, B major. We'll say that's an A. This is also an A. Well, if that's an A, the second note in both scales is going to be a B. Now, we're not going to go through every single note of these scales because honestly, the notes don't matter for this discussion. We are focused on the numbers because if you play the right numbers, you play the right pattern. If you play the right pattern, you play the right numbers. It's two sides of the same coin. 1, 2, 4, and 5, those are the same. Again, this third has moved. Now, we could move this third. It's off the fretboard here on this screen, but we could move it that way. That's not very convenient to play that. Let me show you. So if we look at these on our fretboard with the major scale, starting with the second finger here, 1, 2, and 3, scale degrees 1, 2, 3. If I flat that third, it's going to end up down here. That's not very convenient. I've got to do this position change. So that note, it turns out, is available right here. Same note, different string. So instead of starting on my second finger, as I would do a major scale, I'm going to start my minor scale on my first finger. And now I can reach that flat 3. My 4 and my 5, those are in the same place. My flat 6 is available here. My flat 7 is available here. And then my 8 is available here. Learn these numbers really well because these are how we will learn new scales and chords. Now, you know we're not going to get through this lesson unless I give you some homework, right? So your homework is to learn this pattern. Learn the fingerings, yes, but learn also the scale degrees so that when you go to learn other minor scales, in other words, other scales like this one, and by the way, the difference between a major and a minor scale categorically is the third. So anytime you have a regular 3 or a 3 from the major scale, then we think of major tonality. And anytime you have a flat 3 or a 3 from the minor scale, we have minor tonality. So any scale with minor tonality, if you know the minor scale really, really well, the natural minor scale, you'll be able to adjust some of those numbers and learn other scales. And this is how we get into modes. When we start learning modes, we're going to think of the major scale, think of the minor scale, and then think of very small exceptions. So again, learn your major scale really, really well. Then learn your minor scale really, really well. And think in scale degrees. Here's how we're going to do that. We're going to think bass needs to be on, okay? So we're going to think number 1, we're going to think 2, okay? And then we come here, we're going to think flat 3. Okay, so 1, 2, and flat 3. 4, we're going to think 5, going to think flat 6, flat 7, and the octave. Now, in order to engage the brain, you need to do more than just sort of list them as you go. So play 1 in between each note and say the notes as you go and think of them as a distance from 1. So if this is 1, this is 2. Okay, if this is 1, this is flat 3. If this is 1, this is 4, 1 and 5, 1 and flat 6, 1 and flat 7, a little bit awkward there, got to raise the wrist, 1 and 8. Thank you so much for showing up to our lesson today on the minor scale pattern. If you have questions for me, please write your questions in the comments below, or you can reach me at stepbystepmusic.com. This is getting confusing.